Valentina, where the hell have you been, loca?
Ah, what an iconic line.
You named my daughter after the Loch Ness Monster?
Okay, Hebe. I know these are Twilight codes. You're kind of showing your roots right now.
Wait, I'm not done yet. You better hold on tight, Spider Monkey.
I guess the wolf's out of the bag.
Why am I doing this again?
Yeah, okay. Let's circle back to that.
Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Let's Circle Back. We are your hosts. I'm Hebe.
And I'm Valentina.
Today's episode touches on one of our favorite topics. Well, all of our podcast episodes touch on topics we enjoy, but this one is extra special. We're talking about books.
Yes, woo! I would actually even go as far as to say that books are one of the biggest reasons we bonded so quickly.
Okay, we bonded over a lot of things. Are you sure we're not twins?
Maybe in a past life. Anyways, Hebe and I are both actively trying to read more, and we recommend books to each other pretty often. So, what are you reading right now, Pookie?
Okay, I just borrowed Chain Gang All Star from Valentina, but first I'm wrapping up this book called The Island of Missing Trees by Elif Shafak.
Chain Gang All Stars was so good, and I'm so excited to hear your thoughts when you read it. And for anyone curious, I'm reading Butter by Asako Yuzuki. I've been wanting to read it for a while. It's living up to my expectations. But aside from our personal passion for literature, there were a lot of reasons that we wanted to talk about books today. We thought it would be valuable to discuss recent literacy rates, the marketing of books, world building, and community.
And as a reminder before we jump in, is that this podcast is not corporate affiliated and all opinions are our own. So let's get started. As you may all have heard, and to explain the weird opening we have today, the Twilight series is coming back to theaters this fall, and my For You page is dominated with people quoting and reenacting scenes from the movies. What a fun time! Have you ever read Twilight as a kid, Valentina?
No, I didn't, which I think is pretty unfortunate. I don't know if I'll go back to read it now, but I was 100% all in on Percy Jackson. Personally, Heroes of Olympus was my favorite of the two series.
Okay, for me, I think when we're talking about books, I cannot not talk about the dystopian novels of the time. So Divergent, Matched,
The Hunger Games.
and then, oh yeah. Oh, actually, I did not read The Hunger Games. I
Oh
know,
my God.
how unfortunate. But I feel like as an adult, or actually starting around high school, I noticed myself reading less and less. And now as an adult, I'm really trying to get back into habit of reading at least 5 minutes a day, but obviously not as much as a kid.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. And even when I am so busy and tired, I force myself to read at least 1 to 2 pages before I end the day, just so I can feel like I did it.
Yeah, but we're not, I guess, alone in this. Gen Z as a whole is reading less overall. So the Walton Family Foundation and Gallup 2025 Voices of Gen Z study found that 35% of Gen Z K through 12 students say that they dislike reading, and 43% of them say that they rarely or never read for fun. As someone who graduated from public school education 5 years ago, I find that really hard to believe, as Scholastic Book Fair has been a really core memory for me, K through 12. Like I would buy piles of books.
I was always the kid who went overboard and walked out with just a stack. And every time I was done in like 3 months. I love, love, love reading. I learned to speak English and write well from reading so many books. It really was just such a big thing for me.
Yeah, and aside from book fairs, I was essentially my librarian's best friend. Though I don't know if she knows about this. She did offer to buy or order certain books that I was interested in reading for our library at school. So I would like to say we're good friends.
It does seem like this literacy situation is more dire for Gen Alpha than for Gen Z. And that makes sense. They are the most online generation we've seen to date. I read in Business Insider that seems like a lot of Gen Alpha kids are not developing foundational reading skills before third grade. which is considered a very critical milestone for future ability to read long passages, analyze texts.
As someone with a younger brother who kind of sits at this cusp of being Gen Alpha, Gen Z, he's 9 years younger than me, so he is what, 14? I truly believe he does not have the ability to read books at all. I would offer him the books that I bought as a kid. He cannot hold his attention to read more than just a couple pages, which is actually really unfortunate because I'm someone who's really excited to share books that I really enjoy with someone else. So, yeah. And not just for Gen Alpha, I think as someone coming out of modern education as a whole, I think reading has become less of a leisure activity and more of almost like a chore like thing to do, like a task. And I think it has to do with the way the education system is set up for us.
I'm in the same boat, and forgive me if I've already said that phrase during this recording, but college for sure tanked my interest in reading as a hobby. Let me correct myself. It didn't tank my interest. I just didn't have time for it anymore, or the energy, because after you read 200 pages of Supreme Court documents, you don't want to get in bed with a book. Like,
A lot of articles that talk about falling literacy rate has this tagline where it's like AI is answering more, Gen Z is seeking less answers from books. I also don't agree with that. For me, reading is leisure. It is emotional exploration and less about finding answers. Part of the reason why literacy rate is falling down, not only because of social media and the question about attention span, is also due to maybe the way children are taught to think about reading as an activity. That's also kind of leading to this tragic fall in literacy rate. But today's episode is not going to be us sitting here and scrutinize over why we have this tragic fall in literacy rate, though, spoiler alert, social media does play a big role. But rather, we want to talk about how reading has evolved as an activity and culture.
way to keep things positive. That's what Let's Circle Back is here for.
Let's go.
Would it be crazy if I said that fan fiction is a tale as old as time? I did the fastest Google search ever, so don't blame me if this is not 100% accurate, but it really does seem like fan fiction has been around since the 18th century. Although the more modern version of that, the one that we probably think about when we say fan fiction, might have come from the 1950s or the 1960s when fandom culture was becoming increasingly mainstream.
I 100% agree. I think aside from just reading books, there are certain book related activities that I would consider milestones in my journey as a former nerd or bookworm, though you can argue I'm still a nerd. One is Wattpad.
Platforms like Wattpad and AO3 really gave young creatives and dedicated fandoms a space to extend their favorite fictional and sometimes real world universes beyond the limits of the page. For sure, the worlds of Harry Potter, Twilight, Percy Jackson all had really large presences on these platforms.
I remember writing fan fictions for multiple fandoms. My most successful one yet generated over 15,000 views over the 2 chapters I wrote and then gave up.
Wait, you should have kept going. Those are big numbers, especially for what must have been the early 2010s, I'm guessing.
Around 6th grade, 7th grade.
Hebe, you could have been a full-time author by this point.
I know, what am I doing?
Admittedly, some of the work on these platforms is respectfully poorly written, or at the very least, rushed. Fiction written by young, or I guess a good way to put it would be underdeveloped writers that are like throwing together this world to satisfy their cravings for more. And I think this is a highly relatable feeling. I've personally felt this. You read a book series that has you fully hooked, and then you don't really know how to go on without these characters. I felt it earlier this year when I finished the Mistborn trilogy. I actually sat there for I don't know how long, and I was just like, so this is it, huh? Like it just ends here. Every once in a while, fan fiction gets really big. And before any skeptics listening to this critique that statement, consider that some of the biggest blockbuster films you've watched came from fan fictions. Twilight is one of the most popular examples and the one we're talking the most about today. There is a story called After. 50 Shades of Grey was a fan fiction. These are all quote unquote household names by now, but they came from platforms like Wattpad and AO3. And something that you could also talk about is the fact that recently, or recently ish, these platforms monetized. So writers can just post their stories and they can make money like that. So this is a full-time business now.
I'm telling you, One Direction is the blueprint when it comes to fan fiction, especially on Wattpad. And I think Wattpad has really transformed the book community where you no longer just read, but also get to create and express a figment of your imagination. I think AO3 is slightly bigger for fan fiction and less about original writing. Don't quote me on it, but it also falls in that same realm. And I have a really funny story. Earlier last year, I read a book called All of Us Were Villains. I did not accept the ending, so I went on AO3 to read an alternative ending, and I consider that the canonical ending now.
I really love that for you and I respect that decision. I
Mm-hmm.
would do the same thing.
No, it was devastating. I didn't want to accept reality. And there's another evolution of book culture thanks to social media where you have creators centering around books when it comes to their content. In my top of mind is Jack Edward, who I watch very often, is currently one of the most prominent book creators on the internet, to the point where he even got invited to host the International Booker Prize in 2024.
That's huge.
Yeah. And I think social media, it's a double-edged sword. One, it's contributing to the falling literacy rate, but it has also really benefited bookworms. If you look at platforms like Goodreads, recently developed Fable and Storygraph, it really gave a place for people like us, bookworms, to share our reviews, engage with other people who read, and almost develop our own following, depending on if you are one of those serious reviewers.
So let's use that to pivot into the marketing of books. We have sort of two different topics here, but the first one I wanted to propose was the idea that you can't really market a book in the same way that you'd market, obviously, a beauty product or clothing item, but even film or TV series. There's no live footage for you to use unless you get actors to recreate scenes, but you still have to market the story to sell. There's definitely press tours, and I've seen a lot of authors that will go to bookstores and host signings and read excerpts from the stories, which I think is really nice. And as I'm thinking about that, I'm realizing that it feels like the promotion of books, especially the in-person events, feel a lot more personal and intimate than do the promotions for film and TV series, which are usually moderated by journalists or press who are asking questions and writing articles or releasing interview clips.
No, I agree. There are some really highly visible authors. I think Rick Riordan is one. I almost went on his book tour for his release of Chalice of the Gods, I believe, the new Percy Jackson University spinoff. John Green, I've seen this man and his brother on YouTube way too often as a kid.
They were some of the OG creators,
Exactly. They're there with Bill Nye the Science Guy, I dare say.
icons.
Yes. And then more recently, other high-profile authors include Cassandra Clare, known for her Shadowhunter series, Taylor Jenkins Reid, who has seen mega success with Daisy Jones and the Six, and The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Sarah J. Maas is a big one in the romanticy realm, and then R.F. Kuang, known for The Poppy War and Yellowface. And I think another good example of how important it is to having a community is this social media creator turned author. Her name is Shiran J. Jal, known for her book, The Iron Widow. I personally got to know her through her critiques on Disney's Mulan remake and the historical inaccuracies associated with that movie. And she accumulated a huge following base because of those videos she would make. And after that, she released a book and she became a New York Times bestseller, which I think is really, really incredible.
Hebe actually said something quite interesting while we were thinking about this episode. And it's this idea that authors really no longer need to be reliant on things like bookstore placement, buying media, or even really having to break into the industry by traditional terms. All it takes, if you want to really simplify things, is for an author to create a TikTok account and build hype for their novels that way. If you're following the right trends, using the right hashtags, you can build a following before being somebody in the industry, which is crazy and also really great for independent publishers or independent authors who don't have representation but still want to do that as a career.
100%. And here are some stats just to show the power of social media, particularly book talk or the book community on TikTok, just to give an idea of the economic impact. So as of 2025, Book Talk, the hashtag, has accumulated over 370 billion views, with over 52 million creations jumping on board, according to Forbes. Berkeley called Book Talk a dark horse of the economy, which is a huge praise considering the economy. And just an idea of how Book Talk really propelled or brought back reading. So sales driven by authors with large Book Talk following has over $760 million value. And I think it single-handedly brought back business for Barnes& and Nobles. So apparently pre-pandemic, bookstores were really struggling and like 65% of Barnes& and Nobles were temporarily closed. That's over 400 of their locations. Whereas now they're opening, I believe in 2023, 30 new bookstores, including renovations on existing ones. So we really saw this rebound of reading as a pastime. And social media, especially TikTok, has changed the way these old and new books are being marketed. So they're very conventional. They give really quick recommendations. A lot of popular books on Book Talk is heavily reliant on tropes and labels. So if I say something by Sarah J. Maas, most likely tagging on to like fae or enemies to lovers. It is, I don't know, dark academia. So it's really quick summaries. You don't have to read the synopsis anymore or go out of your way to really find the book you want to read. You can just look at, okay, what type of trope this falls under, and then you kind of get a sense of what you're getting into. It plays a lot into emotion. So again, you don't really think about the summary of the book anymore. When you get those recommendations, it'll be under some catchy tagline like books that made me cry, books that healed my inner child, books that destroyed me after reading them. And it gave authors a way in. So no longer do they have to sell the plot. They just have to sell this promise that if you read this book, it falls under one of these tropes that you might be interested in. Another thing that Book Talk kind of propelled forward is influencer content around books. And influencer is in obviously air quotations, but a lot of creators get ARCs, advanced reader copies from publishers in advance to the publishing date, and they would read it and kind of give their reviews on it. Which maybe I wasn't on the internet for long enough, but I don't think that is something I saw on YouTube during my early days in middle school and elementary school. I think it's a relatively recent invention, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I feel like usually advanced copies of really anything were reserved for journalists. And now traditional media has evolved, and creators and influencers also get their PR packages to talk about books before they come out. Because otherwise, if people aren't reading books anymore, they're definitely not reading articles about books. So
True.
the industry is adapting.
It's like how I would never go on New York Times to look at a review of the book. I would open YouTube or TikTok to look at what other peers, other readers are saying.
Or you might look at Goodreads
You're right.
and see what that readers who like this book also liked this book type
Hmm.
of listicles. But speaking of adapting, film and TV adaptations of popular books or series are really nothing new, but they're still worth talking about. In the context of this episode, I would say, and I think many readers would agree, that if you're going to make a film or TV adaptation of a popular book series, you need the author in the room at all times. They need to be with the writers, they need to be with the producers, they need to be with the actors. Otherwise, you lose the spark that made the source material so impactful. And this is a blanket statement, so definitely doesn't apply to everything. But if a series got popular, it's because people really liked it. And fans are going to scrutinize every decision you make when bringing something to life. One example that I think many people are familiar with are the film versus TV adaptations of Percy Jackson. Originally, Logan Lerman, my king, Pookie, Shayla, ultimate non-problematic white boy.
I love him.
He was cast as Percy Jackson in the film adaptation of The Lightning Thief, and people really didn't like that adaptation. It was just a little bit too far from the stuff that made the original Percy Jackson series so special. Several years passed. Disney Plus acquired the rights to it. Rick Riordan was locked on the project. And now there's a much more beloved adaptation for TV of the Percy Jackson series.
I think another good example of having the author on board is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I believe the author is the script writer for the movie, if not directed the movie. And I think the reason why it was so critically acclaimed is because the author was part of the project and knew how to bring it to life so that the readers who read the book would also enjoy the adaptation. Because there's often this conflict of book readers not liking the adaptation. Also, the same for gaming.
You know who was in the film adaptation of The Perks of Being a Wallflower? Logan Lerman.
Ah, Pookie. Pookie's everywhere.
He's a king. Anyways, something that we really wanted to talk about for this episode related to, honestly, a random recent trend is performative reading. My hot take is that I don't really like people who exclusively read books that they think will make them look cultured or give them some kind of edge of superiority over others. Maybe you really do only like self-help books or memoirs, but if you have an attitude about people who read fiction or sci-fi or fantasy of any kind, it really rubs me the wrong way. That's just a hot take in general about performativity. And if you think reading is just to look good, then maybe reevaluate your relationship to literature. But performativity also becomes more relevant when you think about herd mentality. Just like how everyone is buying the same makeup products and the same clothes, so too are they buying the same books. Playing a huge game of follow the leader and letting TikTok determine what they should be reading instead of what Hebe mentioned at the top of the podcast, which is your personal interests and your creative exploration.
But I think this is where the idea of performative reading takes shape. Of course, you can't ever really know what someone's motivation for reading is, but let's assume from a performative angle from now. As Valentina mentioned, many people turn to TikTok, Book Talk actually, for book recommendations, oftentimes opting in for trendy books to keep up with what's going on online. I think ACOTAR is a perfect example because I started reading the first book, did not like it, even though I thought I would because everyone loved it. But I think it's not just limited to the act of reading, but also certain consumption behaviors, which I know Valentina also has a couple comments on later, which is book hauls. People would make this long, 30-minute long book haul videos showing people like the 30-some books they just bought or like having or building aesthetic bookshelves, having these, I don't know, decorations on it. And at this point, I think reading is no longer self-exploratory, but more so following a trend or using it as a signal about yourself, like building a character or personality trait. And there's also a competitive aspect as well, where people are striving to read X quantity of books in a certain time. But at that point, does it even matter what you're reading? Are you absorbing what you're reading, or you're just trying to hit that checkpoint and then say that, hey, I read 100 books this year?
I honestly agree with the stuff you're saying, and I really do wonder when you're just flexing all of those books, does it even matter what the story is about? Why are you speed running reading for the sake of a tally? At the end of the day, you should enjoy your hobbies. It shouldn't be a competition. Although I guess to each their own. It's not really up to us what people spend their time doing.
Yeah, I used to set really high goals on Goodreads, but now I think I have it at like a lower amount, either 12, so one book a month, or something more reasonable like 20. But
I had my goal for the year as 20 and I just crossed it.
yay!
So
I'm taking my sweet
I
time.
was so happy. I didn't even realize.
That's good.
But to recap today's episode, everybody go out, buy a book, read it, have fun. It's good for your brain.
Are you sure that's a recap?
Okay, fine. So to actually recap the contents of today's episode, literacy rates, as we know, are becoming increasingly concerning. Platforms such as Wattpad and AO3 foster these beautiful communities of book fans. The marketing of novels is inherently different and, to our understanding, a little bit more personal than that of film and TV. And we have really got to talk about performative behaviors on the podcast someday before the trend dies out, because I think it's really funny.
That sounds more like what I was thinking. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Let's Circle Back. Please consider following us on Instagram and LinkedIn to keep up with our content.
We have been your hosts. I'm Valentina.
And I'm Hebe, and we'll see you next time.